G'day, mate. 40 here. So I moved to Los Angeles March 31 of 1994. And for my first 3 years in Los Angeles, all my friends were Dennis Prager fans. Like, all my friends knew Dennis Prager. Like, we all had Dennis Prager in common. And however ridiculous Dennis Prager can sound at times, and he does sound completely unhinged at times, it was a real community. Oh my, I just started the show and I got a doggone throat in my frog in my voice. Oh.
Had the most scathing comments today. The judge said, you know what? You're lying.
Plus my exclusive interview with Vice President J.D. Vance. Can you rule out a recession, even a temporary one? You have like 47,000 people in detention, but you've run out of beds. What next? How do you get Congress to do what it is loath to ever do? Really cut spending. But first, shouting for relevance. That's the focus of tonight's angle. Now, during the first Trump term, she urged leftists to harass Republicans in public. And now, at age 86, Mad Maxine Waters is sounding even more deranged. The equivalent of someone who's just throwing a match on a spill of kerosene.
I'm worried that Trump is on the edge of creating a civil war. I believe he expects violence. I believe he expects confrontation. I believe he's working toward a civil war. We're not going to get goaded. We're not going to get tricked into that.
Oh, she's out of her mind. Trump wants national harmony and a country united behind a new patriotic journey toward peace and prosperity for the middle class, for all Americans. But of course, nationhood itself, that's a threat to the far left. They despise America, and they don't even believe in borders. By extension, they loathe Israel and justify barbaric acts of Islamic terror. Now, we saw this play out today in Manhattan, where the NYPD was forced to get up close and personal with pro-Hamas loons who tried to take over Trump Tower.
Free Palestine! Free Palestine!
Free Palestine!
Free Palestine! Free Palestine! No more weapons, no more wars. Freedom's what we're fighting for.
Now, these protesters have zero ability to engage in an actual debate on issues like immigration or the war in Ukraine or our support for Israel. But they are masters at screaming, off-key usually, sign-waving, property damage, and criminal trespass. Most are borderline illiterate. Their chants don't even make sense. Well, I don't get that at all. Fox's Eric Shawn tried to engage with them. This is how that went.
What are you protesting and why are you here?
We're here in the name of peace, and we're asking for Mahmoud to be released. He was taken illegally by the ICE department. He was kidnapped by the United States government.
The ICE department. And the professors at Columbia are just as incapable of coherent thought. They don't know immigration law, but they try to pass themselves off as intelligent warriors for civil rights.
His only offense has been exercising his constitutional rights to free speech and peaceful assembly. Now we're facing a horrifying reality that our own student, a member of the Columbia community, has become a political prisoner here in the United States.
The only political prisoner would be a conservative on the Columbia campus. Give me a break. If national security concerns are implicated, determined by our Secretary of State, guess what? People with green cards, non-citizens, can be sent packing, period. Read the law. Now, you may be wondering, who's actually behind these protests? Who's supporting them? Who's funding them? The Trump Tower sit-in was organized by the group Jewish Voices for Peace. Now, it has several chapters on college campuses across America, and it bills itself as a home for left-leaning Jews. It pushes the BDS movement, boycott, divest, and sanctions against Israel, and it gets its biggest funding from groups associated with George Soros, the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, and the anti-Israel Kaffen and Lannan foundations. That's just to name a few. Now, remember, Soros himself has his hands in many protest pots, stirring up a toxic brew of anti-Semitism and anti-Americanism. Jerusalem Post writer David Ben Bassat put it starkly. Soros and his organization pay funds to radical anti-Israel organizations that fuel hatred and encourage protests on campuses across the United States. They're funded and organized by branches of Students for Justice in Palestine, SJP, supported by Soros and other anti-Israel organizations. Oh, and here's another fun fact. Jewish Voices for Peace, JVP, had to pay a federal penalty of $677,000 back to the government for misrepresenting itself in a COVID loan application. Basically not revealing that it's essentially does political stuff. It just does research, yeah, right. But none of this matters. None of the facts matter to the crazies.
Okay, so the more you had Black Lives Matter writing, the better it was for conservatives and Republicans, because they just look like a bunch of loons. The more active Antifa is, the better it looks for conservatives, because it makes the left look like a bunch of loons. And the more active this group gets, what Jewish Voices for Peace and this pro-Hamas crowd, it's great. I mean, for conservative, for regular Americans, because the more that regular Americans see this kind of unhinged behavior, I don't think they're going to be down with it. And the organization that this Mahmoud Khalil was fighting for, right, for which he was a spokesman, right, they explicitly promote terrorism, right? They rejoice in the slaughter of innocent people, right? There's nothing sophisticated in this, right? They celebrate the slaughter of innocent people, right? The more blood, the better, right? They explicitly encourage terrorism, violence, the slaughter of innocent people, right? They want all Zionists dead. They want all Jewish Israelis dead, right? They pay tribute to Yahya Sinwar. They think what happened on October 7 was great, right? They praise Al-Qassam Brigade, Hamas's military wing, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, another terrorist group, right? They are all down with the October 7 raping and slaughtering. So that's who they are. I think the more Americans see of them, the less popular they will be. But anyway, back to the online gurus like Jordan Peterson or Dennis Prager, who say all sorts of just completely unhinged things. But I was just reading Aaron Renn today, the Christian who says Christians should face up to the fact that they're now living in America that's more anti-Christian than pro-Christian. So how do you live in a negative America? And he points out that there are people online who are talking very effectively to young men, that the Jordan Petersons of the world have an enormous audience, and our elites and our elite institutions are not getting through to young men because young men don't find that the elites speak to them. So churches, schools, academia, the media, right, they are not getting through to young men. The Andrew Tates, Jordan Petersons, Dennis Pragers are. Like, why the heck? Why? So the online men's influencers, right, they give practical advice such as how to meet women, right? You give practical advice on how to succeed with women, right? There's nothing that young men want more than that. They're not going to find that advice at church or from the media by and large, right? They offer an inspiring vision for manhood. I was so excited when I started listening to Dennis Prager, and he enrolled me in his mission to save America, to save Western civilization, to carry on the fight for good values. So some of these online gurus may be a tad ridiculous, but they do provide concrete community. And sometimes they have good points to make. All right, Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life. There's some good stuff in there. You're morally obliged to take care of yourself, right? You should look after yourself primarily. Traditional institutions like Protestant churches, they'll talk about men being servant leaders and washing people's feet and acting like women and self-sacrificing and serving others, and anything that goes wrong with the marriage and the family, that's the man's fault. Right? That's what you'll hear from pastors. Right? Pastors will preach sermons wondering why men have energy left at the end of the day. Why men shouldn't have time for hobbies. They should just be serving. All right, no wonder young men tune out. You'll have Protestant churches and Christian organizations saying, oh, we need to hold each other accountable with regard to porn. Right, that's not a winning message. So you tell people, get up at 4:30 a.m., work out. Right, give people practical advice that helps them, particularly with the opposite sex. Right, teenage boys, in particular, are hungry for information on what women find attractive, and these online gurus tell them status, confidence, charisma, appearance, style, right? And that's real talk. That's true talk, and it's pretty much the opposite of what they would learn in church. So you'll have a mega church pastor say, godliness is sexy to godly people. Jordan Peterson says girls are attracted to boys who win status contests with other boys. So which rings more true to you? So however lunatic Jordan Peterson is, right, he still comes with more real talk than many Christian priests and pastors. Right, and so my first few years in Los Angeles, all my friends were people I had in common with Dennis Prager. Loneliness is a huge problem these days, and online influencers often build online communities that serve as mutual support and encouragement and networks for their followers. So people have gotten together on this show and they have dated, they've gone into business together, they've invested together, right? If you can provide some type of community where you get some real talk going on, people would choose that over the fake stuff that the major institutions offer. Right? We live in a time of growing loneliness, growing isolation, and teenage boys don't want to hear about safety all the time. Right? So if Aaron Tate is described as dangerous, that just makes Aaron Tate more appealing. And so it's just kind of amusing how none of the traditional institutions have an organic following among young men. They don't generate intense community among young men. So where do young men go to create community? Right? It's not to groups that ask them to hold each other accountable for watching porn. Another thing is that these online influencers create all male groups. My audience, according to YouTube, 100% male. Now, we have some female sounding people who pop up in the chat at times, but unless YouTube's analytics are lying to me, right, my audience is 100% male. And men need all male spaces, even though society wants to stigmatize that, wants to punish that. The New York Times, I think, ran 30 days in a row. Good news, I'm seeking investors from the 40 community. The New York Times, for 30 days in a row, ran front page stories about the Augusta Golf Club that hosts the Masters not allowing women as members. Right? So you have any kind of formal men's group, and you'll be highly likely to be attacked, to be canceled, to be derided, and people with elite connections will drop the mainstream media nuclear bomb on you to expose you and to shame you. Much better to have informal male networks, right? Informal male retreats like this, right? Nothing formal. We're just all friends here. Now, in the mainstream media, the main people who speak out on men's issues and male shortcomings are women. In July, Politico published a masculinity issue, July 2023, featuring 4 articles on the theme of masculinity, every one of them written by a woman. You won't find priests or pastors talking out about specifically male problems, male needs, how men are being screwed over, how men are in trouble, and what can be done, and how perhaps women should dial back in some areas to allow males to thrive, right? You won't hear that from anyone with anything to lose. So you have all these people like Jordan Peterson building a following because they have an inspiring vision of manhood. It includes sacrifice, it includes service, but it isn't limited to that, right? They come with practical insights and advice. Sometimes the truth is unpopular in the mainstream media, but because it's real talk, right, it's far more valuable than anything that young men can get from our major institutions. And we even have people on the left, right, who are speaking out on these issues. Here we go. I've just been reading Renn lately. Here's his latest post.
This voiceover is AI generated. Richard Reeves, author of the must-read book of Boys and Men, Why the Modern Male is Struggling, Why It Matters, and What to Do About It, and founding president of the American Institute for Boys and Men, is the subject of a great profile in The Nation. It's the cover story for their April issue. The Nation is an old-school left-wing publication, but they are sympathetic to Reeves's agenda that seeks to address the problems facing young men and the gender inequalities that disfavor men. Reeves is an avowed feminist, clearly states that he doesn't want to roll any part of feminism back, and says that there are still areas like the C-suite where there's still work to do on achieving equality for women. But still, plenty of feminists are skeptical or even outright hostile to his agenda, as you'll read. Here are some excerpts from the piece.
At one point, Reeves himself would have been skeptical of his book's premise. He's described feminism as perhaps the greatest economic liberation in human history. But in his work studying economic inequality at the Brookings Institution, where he was formerly a senior fellow, he had run into what he has called the side effects of feminism's glorious achievements. The starkest data was in education, particularly in college. Since Title IX was passed in 1972, the gender gap in bachelor's degrees has widened, but in the opposite direction. The biggest risk factor for dropping out of college, controlling for everything else, is being a man. Those struggles have extended to the labor market. When adjusted for inflation, most American men today earn around $3,000 less than men did in 1979, which leads to a grim realization. Much of the narrowing of the persistent wage gap between men and women can be explained by the stagnating wages for men. When Reeves set out to write a book on these findings, friends and colleagues advised him to drop it as a matter of career preservation. What you're saying is true, Reeves remembers.
Right. It's bad for your career to talk about problems that men have. Right? Pastors, Christian leaders are intimidated to talk about the unique challenges facing men today because it's bad for their careers.
Hearing, but for God's sake, don't.
And why is it bad for their careers? Because feminism dominates their major institutions. People with power tend to be on the left, and they tend to be friendly towards feminism. And so from the media to much of business to our elite cultural institutions and academic institutions, right, overwhelmingly feminism dominates, and any specific sympathy shown for men, qua men, for men as men, is thought to be attention taken away from female struggles.
Say it. They warned that he'd end up sounding like Josh Hawley, the Republican senator from Missouri whose 2023 book, Manhood, the Masculine Virtues America Needs, advances the issue from the right. Hawley represents the post-Trump, post-Me Too Republican Party's awkward attempt to synthesize its church-based brand of social conservatism with the manosphere, a collection of online subcultures unified by anti-feminism. Another product of this collaboration is Vice President J.D. Vance, whose choice phrases like childless cat ladies were ripped from the Manosphere podcast he'd appeared on as he was burnishing his credentials within the extremely online new right. So Reeves set to work, assembling a manuscript bursting with data on how men and boys were falling behind. He lambasted denialism from the left and atavism from the right. Then it was rejected by every publisher he sent it to. Reeves recalibrated. He'd need to be less polemical.
So almost all major publishers in America are feminist in orientation. And George Gilder, his great work, Men and Marriage, he couldn't get any of the major publishers to touch it. Ended up selling hundreds of thousands of books. But books for men, sympathetic to men, are unlikely to get published. And our educational curriculum is overwhelmingly to produce pussies. Right? You don't get classes in military strategy. You get a steady drumbeat of emasculation of men, trying to dial down competition, dial down men, boys being boys.
Lest he come off as a watered-down men's rights activist. He also didn't think his message would travel if he branded himself as an ally of feminism, promoting healthy masculinity. Even though that wouldn't necessarily be an incorrect way to describe him, he struck the right balance, and in 2022, Brookings published Of Boys and Men on its own press. Almost 3 years later, the project Reeves was told would ruin his career has done the opposite. It launched the mild-mannered British policy wonk into public intellectual stardom. If you've read a magazine article, watched a TV news segment, or listened to a podcast on the crisis of masculinity lately, you've encountered an interview with, or at least a reference to, Reeves. His book was on Barack Obama's summer reading list, and the philanthropist Melinda French Gates awarded Reeves a $20 million grant, $5 million for AIBM, and $15 million in a donor-advised fund to give away. In the spirit of his vision of gender equality, Reeves named the fund Rise Together. Reeves's critics, however, remain skeptical. They argue that his focus on men reproduces the very zero-sum thinking on gender equality he seeks to transcend, and that despite noble intentions, by elevating the idea that men are falling behind women, an idea that most women, who on average earn nearly 20% less than men, would certainly find dubious, he will further inflame the backlash he wants to contain. It takes a village, I agree. Families come in all shapes and sizes, I agree. But some of the villagers should be men, Reeves said. He explained that dads used to matter mostly because they were the breadwinners, and that's changed for a good reason. But dads still matter, and we need to find policies and a culture and a way of talking about this that doesn't somehow see them as second-class parents who are somehow less important, he continued. We have to have a conversation about masculinity in a positive way. I understand it's a difficult time to make that argument, but honestly, you cannot ignore these issues. You cannot ignore these questions and then wonder why the people who are not ignoring them are getting all the attention. Reeves's role during the early days of AIBM, which he envisions becoming a DC policy.
So one characteristic of being masculine is a willingness to take tough decisions. Kamala Harris is the antithesis of masculinity in that she was always a pussy. She was always frightened. She was just unwilling to take any tough decisions. And one thing that you can't say about Trump too is it is unwilling to take the tough decisions, right? This new version of Trump is willing to throw down and fight, which is quite
because
masculine.
these people don't care about the facts, and they don't really care about the law. This is all driven by emotion and by propaganda fed to them online and on college campuses, in the classroom and beyond. And if they could, a lot of these students would have majored in protesting. And you get the feeling that many of these characters, for many of them, protesting is almost a substitute for socializing. It gives them a sense of belonging, a sense of community. It's their entire reason for being.
Stop the bombs and the killing! Fight like hell for the living! Stop the bombs and the killing! Fight like hell for the living! Palestine will live forever! From the river to the sea!
So do you think these people have families, children to look after, any important responsibilities if they can spend their time screaming these inane slogans? Right. I think this is great because the more Americans see this, the less sympathy they'll have for this cause.
They're being lined up, put on buses, about 100 or so arrested. I guess joining a book club just isn't, intellectual enough for them. I think Democrats are making a big mistake if they become identified with those people. It is not a winning message or a good look. Any non-citizen who is thinking of coming here to join the overthrow of the West cause, think again.
If you tell us when you apply, hi, I'm trying to get into the United States on a student visa, I am a big supporter of Hamas, and by the way, I intend to come to your country as a student and rile up all kinds of anti-Jewish student, anti-Semitic activities. I intend to shut down your universities. So we would deny your visa. If you actually end up doing that, once you're in this country on such a visa, we will revoke it. And if you end up having a green card, not citizenship, but a green card as a result of that visa while you're here in those activities, we're going to kick you out.
Good. The country will be better off. Here's the message. If you support terrorists and foment hate in the country, we're not going to roll out the welcome mat for you, and we're not going to take your abuse. That goes double for those torching Teslas as some form of twisted protest.
We catch anybody doing it because they're harming a great American company. We're going to catch them. And they're bad guys. They're the same guys that screw around with our schools and universities, the same garbage.
Of course, Musk knew what he was getting into when he volunteered to help Trump, because he's effective.
So, do you know what holiday is tomorrow? Right, tomorrow is Steak and Blowjob Day. Right, so it's a male response to Valentine's Day, celebrated a month later on March 14. Steak and Blowjob Day.
And because he's knocking over their gravy train, he's the target du jour.
I think I'm at the top of the list for a lot of homicidal maniacs. They're doing the same thing to me that they did to Trump.
Yeah.
Which is that they're making it sound like if you kill me, you're a hero. That's what they're doing is evil. If the legacy media is saying that I'm a Nazi, and that's all you read, then you're kind of in like, well, he's Hitler. We should assassinate Hitler, shouldn't we?
He got it. 100% correct. Violence is not protected by the First Amendment. And despite the left's love affair with Luigi Mangione, murderous acts are not an acceptable form of protest. The Democrats had better dial this back. The rhetoric, the violence, the destruction of property. This isn't the Biden administration. They're playing with Trump now, and he's not going to passively accept political arguments that come in the form of citizens being terrorized or property destroyed. And that's the angle. Joining me now, Missouri Senator.
Okay, thank you, Laura. Excellent. All right, some real talk here from the head of the EPA under Donald Trump, Lee Zeldin.
Announcement in U.S. history. Today, the Green New scam ends as the EPA does its part to usher in the golden age of American success. Our actions will lower the cost of living by making it more affordable to purchase a car, heat your home, and operate a business. Jobs will be created, especially in the U.S. auto industry, and our nation will become stronger for it. From the campaign trail to day one and beyond, President Trump has delivered on his promise to unleash energy dominance and lower the cost of living. We at EPA will do our part to power the great American comeback.
Sean, am I right that this is a big deal, and what are the implications going forward politically and substantively?
This is huge. This is kind of like OMB in the sense that people on the outside don't fully appreciate the power that it wields. One of the great success stories that Trump used to talk about during the first term was Scott Pruitt, who had been the EPA administrator at the time, and how he was deregulating things, just not getting the attention. And I think the difference is Lee is obviously a lot more TV friendly, a lot more political. This is huge for the movement. The idea of all of these regulations, especially in the small business world, who have been strangled by ridiculous environmental things that do more to virtue signal than actually protect the environment. So this is
Right. I don't want dirty water. I don't want dirty air, but everything comes with trade-offs. And so it's possible that some of our environmental regulations need a second look.
a huge thing for business, probably big business and small business as well. But this is a huge conservative win for the movement.
Sean.
Yeah,
I mean, Dan, sorry.
Yeah, look, I think he sounded more like the Secretary of Energy. And I think substantively, I think it's terrible because you're talking about clean air and mercury and water and things of that nature. Politically, and this is why, Mark, I think the Democrats are going to have to be careful. I worked for one of my clients years ago was a governor of a Midwestern state and also a Rocky Mountain state, and they both wanted to focus on the environment. But when they got back the data, both qualitative and quantitative, the idea of paying more for energy, for food, for heating, for their car, versus it will make the air cleaner or the car more environmentally friendly. The polling was like 70-30 against the environmental.
Right. We're always told that the public wants more and more regulation of the environment to make the air cleaner and the water cleaner. And everyone wants clean air and clean water. But at a certain level of regulation, right, people are going to rebel.
Action when put in that context. And I think coming off of inflation with tariffs and DOGE and all the economic anxieties, if we start, trying to die on the hill for the EPA, I think it's dangerous. But personally, I mean, for the country, I think it's terrible.
Yeah. Raise your hand if you want to get in the conversation. Again, we need 3 new people or the show will be eliminated. I've seen so much wasted polling money, so much money wasted on polling in the last 25 years by pro-environmental groups who are trying to convince their clients and their members that it's a winning issue for them. And as Dan just said, if you poll it honestly, it's not, which is why Zeldin is so confident in doing this, which is why Republicans talk about, taking their car away, taking the dishwasher away. Of course, the country needs a balance. And what Zeldin's saying seems to me, both politically and substantively, if you take it literally, it's too much. For it's not sensible what he's saying. The EPA can't be in charge of making things affordable. In fact, the founding language,
see, I disagree with that though. But I mean, I think for a lot of,
I think they are genuine friends and their spouses are friends. But let's start this way, because again, we'll tackle this from all sorts of directions. Dan, if he runs, is he clearly a first-tier candidate or maybe not?
Yes, he is. And one, he's done it once before, and he did.
Okay, talking about Mayor Pete here. And does being short and gay help or hurt him to become president of the United States?
Reasonably well. Two, he is authentic, he is comfortable in his own skin, and he is unafraid to go talk to almost every single audience. And it's not a forced or kind of contrived thing. The other thing that I find, and this may be the most important, usually after 8, or in really Trump's case, it's going to have been 12 years of one candidate dominating the conversation, the country looks for a personality and temperament opposite of what you have currently in office. Maybe that won't be the case, but if that is so, Pete Buttigieg is the opposite of Trump. Like, he really, in so many, it's stylistically, the way he talks, he's kind of always smiling. He's not an angry, kind of like in-your-face guy. That would set up as a real contrast, because I believe J.D. Vance is, whether he likes it or not, going to basically have to run for Trump's third term. And so I'll be curious to see if the country kind of starts saying we want something different.
Sean, do you believe, as Dan does, that he's automatically a first-tier candidate?
Yeah, but I mean, and I'm not trying to be a jerk about this, but I do think you're grading on a curve here. I mean, I don't know that in a normal 10 years ago kind of way, no. But I think that considering the current crop, he immediately rises. He can raise money. He's got a national name. He's run before. He held a cabinet position, very media friendly. And I believe this. I wrote this in my first book, that I believe that Pete Buttigieg will be the nominee. He has enough of the resume. He's a McKinsey guy, so he can claim business. He's got the veteran.
I just can't imagine Mayor Pete being a top-tier political candidate. I mean, who's excited about Mayor Pete?
So he can say that, and then he's gay, and so he checks the progressive box, because you can't be a straight white dude in the current Democratic Party. So I think that he is the kind of perfect thread the needle kind of guy for the Democratic Party. That's my take on this. Where their party is right now, I think he can. He's got the name. The media loves the guy. He's not been held accountable for any of his previous work requirement or position. So I think that he would do very well initially.
Oh yeah, I think I see him a little bit differently in terms of his record and stuff, but I would not underestimate the fact that the base likes him. And we talked about the issues Ron would have, but the base generally likes Pete. Now, I'll be curious, because Pete Buttigieg and Jared Polis may occupy a little bit of the same lane, but I also think, Pete's not tied down by office right now, and he will have the ability to get out there and try to go do some things that those sitting in state capitals or, DC can't do.
I like
that's
him.
Why I think part of the reason he turned down that, because I didn't agree. Axelrod saying he couldn't turn around and run again. I'm sorry. Didn't know a guy named Obama pretty much do that?
Pretty much. I like Pete, and I respect him, and I don't diminish his strengths as you guys have outlined him. I don't think he's automatically a first-tier candidate. Obviously, it depends on who else runs. But let me ask you this way to tease out some of the
Wait, can you explain that? Why?
Let me ask you this. Let me ask you this. If you were inclined to help him, Sean, and he called you and he said, Sean, I'm all in. Here, here's my finance plan. Here's my political plan, et cetera, et cetera. And he said, what are 3 things I should be worried about? Not for the general, but for the nomination. What would you tell him his vulnerabilities are for the nomination? 3 things. Dan already knows his, so I went to you first.
It's a good. I'm trying to think. I don't know. I'm too common sense.
Well, I'll give you one that you should have at the top of mind, which is black vote. Right? He showed extraordinary weakness last time with black voters, and we don't know
didn't he make up a lot of that at DOT? I mean, I think that's where he overcompensated at DOT.
We don't know what the calendar is going to be like in terms of what states will vote early, but there will be states that vote early with substantial black populations. So that's
he knows that. I think that my understanding was that
hasn't broken through to me. So that's number 1. And the other is, got to say it, he's short and gay. Yeah. So you can say winning the nomination, being short and gay is a positive. And for some people, maybe not short, but gay is a positive. And I know for some people there is. But there's going to be a premium for the party in 2028 on winning, right? It's just like 92. There are going to be a lot of voters who are willing to swallow stuff in order to win. They'll say, I don't like this fact. If this person can win. I've looked at the list of people who've won the presidency.
So they willing to swallow short gay Mayor Pete?
None of them were openly gay. 3 were gay, but none were openly gay. And so it's just a risk. And in almost every presidential race, not everyone, but in almost every presidential race in the television era, the taller person is won. The Republican nominee in 2028 will be taller than Pete Buttigieg. So
that's great stuff. All right, that's plain talk. Good stuff there from Mark Halperin. All right, David Bahnsen is the new sponsor for the afternoon evening show of Mark Halperin, and he's written a book saying work is the meaning of life. And so what was it that Angus put here in the chat? Something about how Christians venerate work more than Jews. Too many churches teach a Calvinistic work is good because work is noble nostrum. Judaism doesn't take this view of work. Work is just work. I'm not sure. From the Bible, 6 days a week shall you work. You shall earn your bread by the sweat of your brow. Judaism has a pretty high view of work. I think work for most people, in particular men, is consistently about the most noble thing that you can engage in.
Idea.
Yeah, your book makes the claim that work is the meaning of life. And one of the things you say at the beginning is some of what you say might be controversial. Maybe that would be one. Why do you say work is the meaning of life?
Well, I do think that it's less controversial when people understand and read what it is I'm actually saying. But the reason I say it is because God said it. And so I don't think I'm saying anything that ought to be controversial, but it is somewhat provocative when it's taken to its full implication, although I would argue that doing so leads to a very joyful and meaningful and purposeful outcome. I say it's the meaning of life because God created us and gave us an account of that creation in Genesis chapter 1. And what he essentially did is spend the first 25 verses telling us the story of him creating the world, and then took a little pause in verse 26 before giving us the account of making us and set the stage for what it was he was.
When you work and you hold down any kind of job, it means that while you're working, generally you're putting other people's needs ahead of your own. And this is a healthy thing to do for 40 hours a week.
Was doing, and 4 times in 2 verses said that he made us.
Right. And if you then have a family, all right, you're probably putting other people's needs ahead of your own an additional 20, 30 hours a week.
In his image and likeness, that we alone were made as image bearers of God, made with this elevated dignity. That elevated status is reinforced in verse 31 when he referred to us as being very good after only giving the mere description of good to, little things like the oceans, the sun, moon, and stars, and all that kind of stuff. So the animal and plant kingdom are separated from what he made with mankind. But these verses 26 through 28 in the middle of this creation account tell us that he made us to be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, to rule over the earth. We have commonly referred to this as a creation mandate, a dominion mandate. But what I am trying to say is that there is no way to interpret any of these verses, us living out our image-bearing status with God, being fruitful, being multiplicative, all of these concepts, including into Genesis 2, caring for the garden, ruling over it. This entire setup of why God made us is able to be summarized in the synonym work: stewardship, care, dominion. And I think that this concept is vitally important in economics. It's one of the passions of my life that Christians understand. Economics is a social science, a moral philosophy of addition and multiplication, not subtraction and division.
So Aaron Renn is the host here. He's this guy on the left. And he has been my favorite thinker for the past 6 days, right? He has sustained my attention. He has many interesting things to say.
And that in that process, what we're essentially doing is what we would refer to as work. And I recognize in chapter 3, we get into sin and the curses, and there is, of course, a redemptive change in history, but the creational normative has been established that God made us to work as he himself worked.
One of the things you clearly distinguish is between the production view of life from the consumption view of life.
I think this is awesome that a billionaire, right, someone who manages billions and billions of dollars, is speaking out about his religious faith and then making it practical.
Just read a line from your book. You say, "I am convinced that the fundamental divide between the 2 primary economic camps today is not big government versus small government. This can lead to the classic debate of central planning versus laissez-faire. But at its root, this is a debate over the primacy of production versus consumption."
If, it's funny, I actually think I'm being very generous here because when one understands the sort of grandfather of central planning and 20th century modern economics, I don't think John Maynard Keynes would disagree with anything I said, that the focus on stimulation of aggregate demand, of consumption as a driver of economic activity, it lends itself to central planning, that there are masterful manipulators that could help convince us to consume more when we don't feel like consuming. My anthropological view is that God made us with a certain reason and rationality, certain moral responsibilities, and various faculties, both as individuals and as members of community.
So it's incredibly cool that this guy, a fervent Christian, is the sponsor of the afternoon show for elites by Mark Halperin. Right, Mark Halperin puts on an overwhelmingly secular show for elites, discussing the latest in American politics. And this guy here, a fervent Christian, is his sponsor. Right, that's a beautiful interjection of God into the secular realm.
The way we interact with others, and that I don't think most human beings need to be incentivized to consume. I think we know what our appetites are, what we like and don't like. And if there's anything that's a default position for the human person, it's to consume. But that what we were made to do is produce. And this is most evidenced in the fact that we cannot consume if we don't.
So I don't have big theories on masculinity, and someone who's a bachelor, I'm not going to be promoting my particular vision of masculinity, but it does have something to do with responsibility and working for the welfare of other people and devoting yourselves to something greater than yourself, to protect and provide, right? That seems to me to be the masculine vision. And the more you can provide, generally, the more you can protect. Most problems in life can be dealt with money. Not all problems, right? You've got an out-of-control addiction, all right, money isn't going to solve your problem, but it may make it a lot easier to recover. So, yes, most problems in life can be solved with enough money, and the act of earning money through legal, legitimate ways is ennobling, and it will connect you to other people. It will give you a sense of purpose and meaning. You'll have a much clearer understanding of yourself. You'll feel more alive, right? It's really hard to be of service to other people and be poor, right? If you are effectively meeting other people's needs, if you are effectively doing your job, it's really hard to stay poor and isolated, right? Work starts to connect you to other people. It turns you on to what other people need, and you stop thinking about what you need and start thinking about what other people need. It's incredibly ennobling. It's masculine. I just don't know impressive men who are not devoted to hard work. There may be some, but I just can't think of any.
Don't produce. And in fact, we can't consume if someone else doesn't produce. That our consumption is afforded by our production, and our consumption is enhanced by the productive capacity of others. So getting this right from the garden, where we see God being a creator and making us to be a co-creator, and the fact that God did not make the world finished, that he made the world with raw materials, but made us to be the co-creators who would go extract the potential from creation. I think this is an incredibly important theological concept, but it's fundamentally economic. If you want more economic growth, you need more production, and consumption follows. And of course, production responds to signals that are learned from consumption. And this is a pro-cyclical positive feedback loop understanding of economics. The consumption first theory fails economically. It begs for central planning, but it essentially fails because it is wrong anthropologically. It misunderstands the need of the human person.
When I heard you talk about that, it hits a theme I've talked about for many years, even going back to my writing on cities, that so much of the way people who live in sort of urban areas.
So there are a lot of exciting, fun, stimulating podcasts out there. Aaron Renn has one of the rare ones that's just good for you. It's just ennobling, right? And you don't have to be a Christian to get benefit from it, right? He consistently puts out thoughtful discussions and thoughtful essays, and his work is simply ennobling. It brings you more into contact with reality and with what you could aspire to be.
You don't need to single them out. It could be anybody in America. We define ourselves in part by consumption, and kind of our goal in life is to consume. I want to go to the new pour-over coffee shop. I want to go to the farm-to-table restaurant. I want to see the concert of the new hot indie rock band. I want to wear these particular labels of clothes. And all of our consumption choices are said to define us today in a much greater way, I think, than would have been the case certainly 100 years ago, when what you did for a living, would be much more central, I think, to identity. Not that work is irrelevant to people, but I think the consumer model of personal identity is much higher than it was in the past. In the past, people didn't get to consume a lot of surplus stuff.
You know, what's fascinating about that is I think you're exactly right. I think it has led to a much more shallow existence for a lot of people. I don't think it's limited to upper class. I think in a lot of ways that dynamic is far more pronounced at even lower tiers of the socioeconomic strata, that, consumptive status is viewed as aspirational. I know myself as a son of a pastor that went to a private school.
We have profound abilities to uplift other people and to elevate other people, and we often don't take advantage of this, and Aaron Renn discusses this.
This voiceover is AI generated. One of the most important things we can do as a parent, mentor, or friend to others is to elevate their sights, to help them think bigger or about possibilities.
So I remember talking to my friend's dad about how I was planning on transferring to Sacramento State University, and he said, "You know what they say about Sac State, don't you?" And I said, "No." He said, "Well, they say somebody's got to go there." And it was so stinging that I decided to study harder and got into UCLA.
They'd never imagined. Economist Tyler Cowen wrote a short post on the high return activity of raising others' aspirations. He talked about how, when impressive people applied to the master's program at his school, he would offer them admission to the doctoral program as well, and suggest that they pursue that route. He writes,
"At critical moments in time, you can raise the aspirations of other people significantly, especially when they are relatively young, simply by suggesting they do something better or more ambitious than what they might have in mind. It costs you relatively little to do this, but the benefit to them and to the broader world may be enormous. This is, in fact, one of the most valuable things you can do with your time and with your life."
Cowen also asked Paul Graham,
Great comment in the chat, a quote from Zig Ziglar. "You can have everything in life you want if you'll just help other people get what they want." Zig Ziglar was a Christian too.
Founder of the prestigious Y Combinator Silicon Valley Accelerator, about this in a podcast they did together.
Graham, people are, for various reasons, for multiple reasons, they're afraid to think really big. There are multiple reasons. 1, it seems overreaching. 2, it seems like it would be an awful lot of work. As an outside person, I'm like an instructor in some fitness class. I can tell someone who's already working as hard as they can, "All right, push harder. It doesn't cost me any effort." Surprisingly often, as in the fitness class, they are capable of pushing harder. A lot of my secret is just being the person who doesn't have to actually do the work that I'm suggesting they do.
Graham goes on to talk about how one of Y Combinator's major value adds is helping people think bigger about their idea.
Back to this idea, though, of how to get people to be more ambitious. It's not just introducing them to other ambitious people. There is a skill to blowing up ideas. Blowing up not in the sense of destroying, like making them bigger. There is a skill to it to take an idea and say, "Okay, so here's an idea. How could this be bigger?" There is somewhat of a skill to it. The weird thing about YC interviews is, in a sense, they're a negotiation. In a negotiation, you're always saying, "Oh, I'm not going to pay a lot for that. It's terrible. It's worthless." Yet in YC interviews, the founders often walk out thinking, "Wow, our idea is a lot better than we thought," just because of what we do.
Camden Spiller, owner of Maddox Industrial Transformer, a high-growth enterprise that's been on the Incorage 5000 list of fastest-growing companies in America for several years in a row, makes the same point about Christian business owners thinking bigger about their companies. As I wrote about Spiller in my book, Life in the Negative World,
according to Spiller, they're working.
So when I was growing up as a Seventh-day Adventist Christian, one of the things that drove me crazy about Christianity, as was presented to me, was how anti-masculine it was, how feminine it was, how unexciting it was, how it lacked danger and just transcendent purpose and meaning that really spoke to me. And also how impractical it was, how just theoretical, how removed it seemed from reality. And if only I had discovered an Aaron Renn, right, I would have been a much happier, more productive Christian as a teen.
Working hard toward a goal of $1 billion in the annual revenue. He thinks more Christian business owners should develop an expanded vision for what they can accomplish. As he put it, you don't have to just be mom and pop to hold true to your values.
The impact of elevating people's sights can be transformational for their lives. In response to my essay on choosing the right ladders to climb, John Stowe.
We can transform people's lives. A word of kindness, give them an aspiration. Right? We have a profound ability to help others.
Folks posted.
From the South, went to LSU for undergrad, EE major, math minor. Wanted to do a humanities thing for grad school. So I went to see a professor who had taken an interest in me. I had this professor for an honors class, and he was the chair of the philosophy department at the time. And after that, he really took an interest in me, so he would recruit me to take his other honors classes, which I did. When I was a senior, I went to see him for his advice on the type of humanities program I should apply to and to get some recommendations of schools I should look at, maybe in religious studies, which I had an interest in. So the first things out of his mouth were, "Have you considered Harvard or Princeton? They have good programs in religion." I went into a state of mild shock. No, I had not in fact considered any schools in that tier. I seriously thought he was going to suggest I check out some list of middle or lower tier state schools or obscure liberal arts colleges. So I was like, hold up, this is possible? For me? But this guy was the department head, and he had taught me in a number
Right. Helping people to think, wow, this new option, this is possible for me. Right. You can change your life with this.
of classes, and he knew my work. So when he said I could do this, I believed him. I was like, okay, well, I guess that's what's up then. I applied to both those schools, and I got into them, and got to pick which one, and I got 2 advanced degrees there, then went on for a PhD at UChicago. If this one professor hadn't suggested I could do this, I wouldn't have even tried. It just wouldn't have occurred to me, not even on the radar. I hope to be that guy for someone else one day.
Again, this doesn't have...
So I was taking about my 10th, 12th Alexander Technique lesson, and my teacher said, maybe you should become an Alexander Technique teacher, right? And I never considered, never thought of it, but I liked my teacher. And when she suggested it, it just immediately fell into place. And here I am.
To be about getting into the Ivy League. It could be asking someone who is only thinking about local colleges, have you ever thought about going to school out of state? So many people sell themselves short. Even when we do achieve something, we often end up with imposter syndrome, thinking we don't really deserve it or belong there. And some people just don't know about the possibilities they should be exploring. I personally received little to nothing of this in my life, and it cost me. One exception, an older pastor did one time tell me I should go to seminary and become a pastor. Now, I didn't do that, but it put a possibility in my head that had ever been there before. I don't think we have to be like fitness instructors and push people to do more than they want.
So there was a professor of ethics at American Jewish University in Los Angeles, Elliot Dorff, who's published something like 30 books. And his kindness, his reaching out to people, inviting them to his home for meals, right? He's inspired countless Jews to become rabbis or to become more deeply involved in Judaism or in academia.
So that might be appropriate in some cases, as with our children. But I do think all of us should make a practice of looking for how we can expand the possibilities those around us can imagine, particularly in elevating their sights in terms of what it is they think they can do or accomplish. The potential value to them is enormous.
Right, and you change your life, that will give you self-respect and passion and strength and enthusiasm. Another excellent Renn essay here, The Hidden Power of Saying Yes. Saying yes can open doors you didn't even know existed.
The case for saying yes. Aaron M. Renn. One of the most common pieces of self-improvement or business advice is to make a habit of saying no. They say you ought to say no more often, a lot more. They say you need to be ruthless in saying no so you can have relentless focus on your mission. There are good reasons that most of us ought to be saying no more often than we do. There are a lot of things we already want to say no to, but just don't do it because we're too afraid to say so. Some people are just taking advantage of us with their asks. Sometimes the things people ask for pose moral or ethical conflicts, and even then we can struggle to say no. If we say yes too often, it can put our mission at risk and even cause us to neglect our own responsibilities. It's not wrong to tell people to say no, but it's incomplete. There's a case for saying yes that's too often ignored. Here are 3 big reasons why you should be saying yes. 1, yes is much more powerful than no. Yes is more powerful than no because yes has more optionality. There are more things that can come out of saying yes than saying no. Saying yes opens up entirely new possibility spaces and maybe even entire new futures for you that you didn't.
So this bloke, Aaron Renn, he's made his career, he's made most of his money as a business consultant.
Even imagine existed. Focus is important, but the most important breaks in life are often the ones that seem random, that come from unexpected places. Writer Nassim Taleb talks about this in his books like Fooled by Randomness and Anti-Fragile. Taleb says, you make forays into the future by opportunism and optionality. Look for optionality. In fact, rank things according to optionality. Optionality is part of the reason industries cluster in a small number of places, like tech in Silicon Valley. These places, where lots of top people in the same field congregate, grease the skids for serendipitous encounters that lead to an investment, a sale, a key new hire, a hot bit of industry news, a book contract, or the solution to a problem. They are places where opportunity and optionality abound. Saying yes to someone who wants to grab coffee creates the possibility, the option for that kind of magic to happen. Saying no does not. That's why Taleb talking about saying yes to invitations to parties or meeting invitations. He writes,
seize any opportunity or anything that looks.
So a bloke on X who's come on the show many times, I've forgotten his name now, he set me up to meet with Misha Saul in Sydney, Australia, who's one of my favorite writers and social media personalities. And yeah, it's a beautiful thing if you can take time for others and at least grab a quick coffee.
Looks like opportunity. They are rare, much rarer than you think. Remember that positive black swans have a necessary first step. You need to be exposed to them. Many people do not realize that they are getting a lucky break in life when they get it. If a big publisher, or a big art dealer, or a movie executive, or a hotshot banker, or a big thinker suggests an appointment, cancel anything you have planned. You may never see such a window open up again. I am sometimes shocked at how little people realize that these opportunities do not grow on trees. Collect as many free non-lottery tickets, those with open-ended payoffs, as you can, and once they start paying off, do not discard them. Work hard, not in grunt work, but in chasing such opportunities and maximizing exposure to them. This makes living in big cities invaluable because you increase the odds of serendipitous encounters. You gain exposure to the envelope of serendipity. The idea of settling.
And this, all right, why do I love this essay? Because it speaks to me, because I sometimes wake up at 1:30 a.m. and it's like, my God, I am living in a prison of my own self-destructive choices to put such a priority on creating solitude for myself to do my reading and my writing that I get disconnected from others and I lose out on the energy, the enthusiasm, the opportunities, the new ideas that come with, building something with someone else. Right? I need to say yes a heck of a lot more.
In a rural area on grounds that one has good communications in the age of the internet tunnels out of such sources of positive uncertainty. Diplomats understand that very well. Casual chance discussions at cocktail parties usually lead to big breakthroughs, not dry correspondence or telephone conversations. Go to parties. If you're a scientist, you will chance upon a remark that might spark new research. Emphasis added.
I'll give a real-life example from my own life. When I was working in consulting, I started a blog called The Urbanophile, The Lover of Cities. Growing up in a rural area, I fell in love with cities when I moved to Chicago. I was passionate about discussing urban issues in a way I no longer was about consulting. So I started my blog, and it turned out to be very popular. It occurred to me that I might want to do something in this space professionally. One day I put up an article contrasting the ideas of the major urbanist writers Joel Kotkin and Richard Florida. Joel must have had a Google alert set because he wrote to me and asked if I'd write for his website, New Geography. NG was basically a group blog itself. It didn't pay anything to writers. I might well have decided I needed to focus on building up my own site and said no. But I ended up saying yes and writing a bunch of free pieces for Joel. Later, he introduced me to the editor of City Journal magazine, where I wrote a few articles that performed very well. Eventually, the Manhattan Institute, which publishes City Journal, hired me as a full-time senior fellow, and I moved to New York City and worked there for 5 years. Saying yes to writing free articles for Joel turned into a dream opportunity for me, an opportunity I had no idea would come from that first yes. Had I said no to him, who knows where I'd be today. This pattern has recurred multiple times for me. I met the person who ended up becoming my biggest financial supporter when he cold emailed me asking to meet for a drink while he was visiting New York City. I had no idea who this guy was, but saying yes to the meeting again opened up possibilities I had never imagined. Yes has optionality. Yes is powerful. Yes can open doors you don't even know exist. 2. Saying yes is a way to do things that don't scale. One of the classic pieces of advice to new tech startups is to do things that don't scale. Although you want to be in a business that theoretically has very high scale and flywheel effects, you often have to do a lot of non-scalable pump priming to get there. For example, the founders of Stripe, the dominant online payments processor, used to personally install and configure their software on prospects' websites. If they were meeting with a prospective customer, they would offer to install the software personally right there on the spot. Obviously, they couldn't keep doing this, but it was key to getting their business off the ground. Taking all those coffee meetings or Zoom calls, being a guest on all those small podcasts, answering the random email from someone who asks you a question are all things that don't scale, but are part of helping you achieve escape velocity. Let's be honest, most of us aren't so busy that we can't do these things.
All right, that's Aaron Renn, the hidden power of saying yes.
I'm tonight. Why's everybody complaining? Enjoy the ride. The wholesale version of inflation. Up zero, goose egg, boy, that is progress.
We have to make sure that Americans know it's not just that Donald Trump is bad, but we're offering them something better. And I think that's what we need to work on.
Democrats start running for president?
This is a code red, shout it from the rooftops moment. We have to stop them.
Hello, everybody. It's JD. I use they, them, and turtle for my pronouns.
Happy DEI Thursday. Plus,
men, stop being afraid of the bathtub. It's a great place for sex.
Trump Tower's been taken over. A 100 protesters arrested this morning after breaking into Trump Tower, chanting, "Free Mahmoud." Who's Mahmoud? He's a Syrian agitator who loves Hamas and hates Jews and who made so much mayhem at Columbia last year, he cost the school millions of dollars. Trump's trying to deport him. And Democrats are siding with the anti-Semitic foreigner who broke the law. Democrats want to deport Elon, but keep Mahmoud. They're standing for Mahmoud, but not for a black kid with brain cancer who wants to be a cop. They used to stand for electric cars, but then Elon caught them censoring conservatives and stealing from the government, so they're attacking Teslas with pickaxes.
Armed with a pickaxe and sledgehammer in Seattle's Soto neighborhood, these two fellas went to town on this Tesla. The car was left in shambles with shattered windows, massive punctures, and tons of anti-Elon Musk graffiti.
We don't like what Elon Musk is doing.
This man would only give me his first name. Greg, sorry. But says he actually owns the white Model S.
I bought it just to destroy it.
A man sledgehammered his own Tesla to get back at Elon after he paid for it. If there's one thing liberals are good at, it's destruction. They can't build a reservoir, a high-speed rail, or a charging station, but they can tear down a statue, a border, and a Tesla. It's one thing for the kid in the back of the car to keep saying, "Daddy, are we there yet? Are we there yet?" But it's another for the kid to slash his own tires. Remember the Heinz commercial?
I'm passing the Heinz? Sure.
When you've got something this rich, this thick, why waste time with anything else? Heinz ketchup. The best things come to those who wait.
We don't even have to wait that long for the good things. Trump cut off the ability of...
Okay, looking at those protesters, it reminds me of the good times from 2016. Remember the meme? I like you. You're funny. I'll deport you last. Good times.
Russia to sell oil to Europe and said if Putin doesn't agree to a ceasefire, Russia's going to suffer devastating consequences. And this morning, Putin says he's going to agree to a 30-day ceasefire. Isn't that what liberals have been wearing the Ukraine flag pins for? To stop the Russian invasion? But since Trump's brokering the peace, Democrats are anti-peace. And no one gave him any credit. Peacenik Liz Warren's clapping her hands like this to keep funding a war that never ends. Now, if Trump wins the Nobel Peace Prize, are Democrats going to even be able to say congrats? Gas prices just hit 3-year lows. Mortgage rates are falling. Inflation's cooling. And border crossings, they basically stopped. These are all things Democrats argued a president had no control over. Then how'd all these things happen when we got a new president? Democrats were for Doge for decades. But now that Trump's the one doing the doging, they're standing up for waste, fraud, and abuse.
Until today, USDA was funding a $397,000 grant in the San Francisco Bay Area to educate queer, trans, and BIPOC urban farmers and consumers about food justice.
So if you're a straight urban farmer, you don't get money. Only a queer urban farmer gets money. $400,000 for a pack of seeds, some gardening gloves, and a watering can. You know how much mulch you can buy for $400,000? They're stealing the money.
So I was pretty friendly with Andrew Breitbart between 2002 and 2007, but after the fall of 2007, I wasn't able to focus on writing anymore. And so, the friend that we had in common who kind of brought us together, Kathy Sipe, she died of lung cancer in 2007. So I never saw Andrew again after 2007. But when we talk on social media, he was consumed by the Obama administration funneling money to black farmers, right? That was the payoffs to black farmers was the thing that he found outrageous, from 2009, 2010 or so. And then I was shocked to find out he died, and have that open question. Was he an addict? Was he using substances, illegal substances? Did that play a role in his heart attack?
If we can doge queer urban garden grants, we could probably balance the budget.
When the president balances the budget, his first move is going to be, he has suggested that he would like to waive taxes for people under $150,000. That's aspirational, that when we balance the budget. And let me tell you, he's got a plan to balance this budget.
Trump wants to doge taxes for the working class, and Democrats are breaking into Trump Tower, screaming to free a radical Muslim. Imagine how great this country would be if we could all work together, and Democrats didn't just oppose to oppose. CNBC's mad about the market and blames Trump's tariffs, but there's a method to the madness.
Yesterday, General Motors was in. They want to invest $60 billion. The people from Facebook were in yesterday. They're going to invest $60 billion by the end of the year. Apple, as you know, a few days ago announced $500 billion investment. They're going to build their plants in the United States, which, as you know, almost all of their plants are in China. Now they're building in the United States.
This trade war, which is in its second week, is already bringing in money, jobs, and manufacturing. Politicians lost 100,000 manufacturing plants over 40 years and 5 million jobs. It could take longer than 2 weeks to fix it. The S&P's off 10% now, and the media acts like it's Black Friday. The S&P had a stretch where it fell off 10% just last year, and another 10% dip the year before. It happens. It's going to take a minute to bring manufacturing back. It's the only thing both parties agree on. The media never panics when we lost the muscle of American industry. As long as equities were up, the media was happy. Who cares about American jobs and wages? They threw parties for globalization. All the brilliant minds said the earth was flat and it was the end of history. Not so fast.
We've been ripped off for years, and we're not going to be ripped off anymore. No, I'm not going to bend at all. Aluminum or steel or cars, we're not going to bend. We've been ripped off as a country for many, many years. We've been subjected to costs that we shouldn't be subjected to.
Today, we started a booze war. The Europeans didn't like our steel tariff, so they put a 50% tariff on whiskey. 47 doesn't drink, so we just put a 200% tariff on all European wines and champagne, which will probably break the French, and they'll surrender like usual. Looks like for now, Jesse Waters won't be buying any more Bordeaux, so if anybody knows any great California cabs, let me know. Trump's fighting the trade war that Democrats promised to fight for decades, but never did.
I know you don't like Trump's style.
No.
You haven't liked it for 12 years. I spent, an hour on my way up here looking at all these old articles coming out of liberal outlets over the past 10, 15, 20 years, talking about the disaster free trade has had on middle-class America, how it's destroyed manufacturing in this country, how once upon a time the Rust Belt was thriving, now it's in decay. You can't blame that on Donald Trump for wanting to focus and put a microscope and saying, wait a minute here, we have left a significant percent of our fellow Americans behind. Let's fix that.
They all yell at him. The whole world treats America like a duty-free shop, but they won't even let a single American company through their door. What's the Democrat strategy to get other countries to lower their tariffs? What's the Democrat strategy to bring manufacturing jobs home? The only Democrat strategy is to print and spend and tax until we go bankrupt. It's not like the markets aren't going to go back up. Trump's first term market performance was better than Biden's. Trump.
Okay, I want to get back to that terrific Renn essay on the case for saying yes.
Few of us are celebrities that get besieged with requests every day. I'm a busy person, but even I am able to respond to most requests and say yes to a lot of them. I'm only now reaching the point where I'm pondering whether I should be transitioning to saying no more often. One of my guiding principles is to pay it forward. I want to help out others who are getting started in this business the way bigger name people help me. So I go on a lot of smaller podcasts, most of which probably will never do anything to help me out. I want to pay it forward regardless of whether it benefits me or not. But like many things in life, it sometimes turns out that you end up doing well by doing good. For example, all it might take is one high-value person finding me through one of those podcasts to make the investment of all that time on all those small podcasts more than worthwhile. Some of those people who are much smaller than me today in terms of audience might one day be much bigger. Just as I never forget the people who helped me when I was trying to get off the ground, maybe they won't forget it either. 3. Saying yes helps you stay relevant. Saying no is related to the bigger self-improvement idea. You also hear that you should ruthlessly prune people.
So I have no desire, actually, at this point, to interview Renn and take up his valuable time because there's nothing that I want to ask him. I'm just reading and reading and reading. Probably everything that I'd want to ask him is probably already answered in some essay or some video.
People out of your life that aren't pulling you up. This is an example of the too cool for school attitude that I can't abide. There are a lot of people, I'm sure you've come across them in your life, who spend all of their time networking up. They only want to talk to or invest time in relationships with people that they think can do something for them. The problem with this approach comes when you succeed at it. It ends up isolating you from contact with the real world. You end up losing touch and ultimately end up not being relevant anymore. This happens to almost everyone who gets famous, even if they don't do it intentionally. Being forced to winnow a flood of requests disconnects you from anybody else who isn't a VIP, which ultimately cuts off from contact with the world. This seems to have happened to journalist Thomas Friedman, for example. Tanner Greer wrote a great piece about Friedman's story arc that explores what happened. Friedman studied the Middle East, then ended up as a New York Times correspondent in Beirut and Jerusalem. This gave him profound insights into the globalizing world that he used to write multiple influential books like The Lexus and The Olive Tree and The World is Flat. It's hard to overstate the extent to which the latter book made Friedman into a prophet-like figure for corporate America. 15 years later, Friedman was something of an internet joke. People would write parody columns in which he explained the world through a conversation with his cab driver. As a superstar columnist, he spent his days doing things like hobnobbing with other elites at the Aspen Ideas Festival. He wasn't on the streets of Beirut anymore, gaining insight into what was coming next. Those elite conversations are important, but they are also one-dimensional. Perhaps Friedman overly relied on his proverbial cab driver because riding in a cab became one of the few times he interacted with the kinds of people he used to talk to daily when he was a foreign correspondent. For people who hit Friedman's level, or say the Hollywood celebrity tier, avoiding this trap is almost physically impossible, so they can't be judged too harshly for it. But the same thing can easily happen to us if we detach ourselves from the everyday kinds of contacts that come from saying yes to people who aren't in a position to do us immediate favors. Young people in particular are a great source of insight, a great way for older folks to keep at least some connection to the zeitgeist. Helping them or meeting them when they ask for it is a free chance to learn something. That's why I love talking to college students. They are my pipeline to the now. Despite the abundance of advice to say no more often, it's not obvious whether most people's problem is that they aren't saying no enough or whether they aren't saying yes enough, letting opportunities pass them by. For the average person, my guess it's more likely that they should be saying yes more often, not less. Note, I originally gave the case for saying yes in a podcast 2 years ago. When I posted it, a bunch of people used it as an opportunity to ask me for things. I admire the hustle, but please don't do that this time. There's a time to ask me for things, but this isn't it.
Damn, some good straight talk. All right. I feel like I learned so much about people from their voice. And the Jolly Heretic, Edward Dutton, picks up on this theme. Can we detect evolutionary fitness based only on someone's voice?
They are going to be high in narcissistic traits. They want to be admired.
Talking about the type of people who appear on reality show, and I had some meetings in Hollywood about getting my own reality show. This was 17 years ago, 10, 15 years ago.
They are probably quite fast life history strategic because that is, i.e., the kind of people that will prioritize sex over nurture. Otherwise, why would they want to go on TV like that and be in a show like that? Why wouldn't they just meet people down the pub like normal people do? And so the particularly interesting couple that you have on this episode is Sarah and Ben. Sarah, as I recall, is a nurse. I can't remember what Ben did, something quite boring.
So it's the show, I think, Love is Blind.
And as they get outside the pods, we start to realize that there are interesting differences.
So the premise of the show is that people just talk to each other without ever meeting each other. And then just based on talking to each other, they figure out if they want to get married or not.
Differences between them. Ben goes to church. Sarah is basically an atheist. And that's the reversal of how it normally is. Normally it's the woman that's more religious than the man, if that's going to be the case. But no, in this instance, no. And she's concerned about this going to church because she's a bit woke. She's a bit woke, and she has a sister who, by the way, I mean, neither her nor her sister are very good looking, but her sister is better looking than her. But her sister seems to be a kind of femme lesbian. Sarah has a very manly chin, is quite masculinized female, which is interesting. And in the end, she rejects him at the altar. And her justification for rejecting him at the altar is she's not sure yet that they're on the same wavelength. I mean, this is also a very dramatic thing to do. She could have called everything off beforehand. She could have discerned this information in the pods and then not married him. Having then spent, I forget how, is it 8 weeks with him, she could have discerned this information and then not gone to the altar. But no, she wants to go to the altar. She wants to make it all dramatic. She wants to be the centre of attention. She wants to be histrionic, essentially, which is what predicts being...
So, yes, we can determine someone's evolutionary fitness. We can get a sense of where they're at physiologically, psychologically, just listening to their voice.
Woke, if you look at the studies on this, if you look in my book, Woke Eugenics, where I look at all the studies, wokeness is associated with narcissism. Why? Because if you're narcissistic, you're insecure, you have all these bad feelings about yourself. So you...
Right. It tends to be the narcissist, the histrionic, the most mentally unstable people who most embrace woke.
You create this false self that you're perfect to protect yourself from those false feelings. How do you reassure yourself you're perfect? You uber socially conform, and then people tell you that you're great and you're morally good and you're better than other people, and so then you feel good. You get narcissistic supply. That's why woke people are attracted. Narcissistic type people at the moment are in a left-wing environment are generally attracted to being left-wing.
Okay, so I should say something about the topic of today's show, and it was another Renn essay, Rediscovering E. Digby Baltzell's Sociology of Elites. And so this bloke defines an aristocratic upper class as one that justifies its status and its privileges through service to the nation, both by assuming leadership and by being open to assimilating the families of new men of merit among the elite. So the aristocratic upper class will bear traditional values and authority and carry them down through the generations. When an upper class becomes a caste rather than an aristocracy, that's when it retains its social status and its privileges, but it ceases to provide leadership, service to the nation, and it ceases to assimilate new worthy men into its ranks. So how do you distinguish between the elite, the wealthy, and the upper class? So a well-functioning society has an aristocratic class. A poorly functioning society will have a caste as the upper class. So when the United States was ruled by WASP, when there was an elite WASP upper class, these were people who provided a great deal of leadership and service to the country. They had an attitude of noblesse oblige, that they, being fortunate, had responsibilities to the rest of the nation. And I don't feel that our current set of elites has nearly the same sense of noblesse oblige, nearly the same sense of service and leadership. So when we had the WASP upper class, it created a community with powerful mechanisms for social control, including the threat of class ostracism. And this enforced standards and norms of class behavior. We don't have this anymore. It's not nearly as powerful. So if you violated the Anglo-American Code of the Gentleman, for example, by cheating at sports, cheating in business, you were likely headed for a painful social exclusion. A divorce would also get you excluded. So until the 1960s in Philadelphia, anyone who was divorced and remarried was automatically excluded from receiving an invitation to the socially exclusive dancing assembly, no matter how much money or power you had. So an elite is not a real group with normative standards of conduct, right? It's not like what we had when we were ruled by a WASP aristocracy. By 1970, Tom Wolfe could observe that the Social Register's annual shuffle, in which errant socialites such as John Jacob Astor are dropped from the good book, hardly even rates a yawn. Right? America was much better served by its old WASP elite than by our current elite. So now we may be looking at the end of the establishment, the collapse of the current ruling elite, and we no longer have a leadership service class at the top of our social hierarchy. An establishment means that a society is led by a class of men who act according to an agreed upon code of manners. Certain things are not done. We don't have this anymore. So we don't have this kind of establishment, and therefore we have a country where money talks and it echoes in a moral vacuum. Right? We don't have class codes of conduct anymore. We only have public scandal constraints, and often not even that. So we have a loss of the WASP establishment, a loss of the WASP establishment's class codes of behavior and social enforcement, social ostracism. We have the weakening of political parties. We have an erosion of norms, including political norms. We have an erosion of standards beyond the political. Right? We no longer have that strong, dominant WASP upper class. Right? It used to create and perpetuate a set of traditional moral standards which would carry authority and to which the rest of society would aspire. Now, without that upper class, these standards are inevitably in decline. Conservatives, for example, often bemoan that men no longer behave as gentlemen, but the idea of a gentleman was defined by the Anglo-American upper class. Right? People sought to live up to the Anglo-American upper class and its standards. Jewish immigrants sought to live up to the Anglo-American upper class. Now that class is gone, it is despised, and the values of fairness and the values of being a gentleman are despised with them. Right? Many cultures have concepts of an upper class gentleman, but there's something unique about the Anglo-American value of fair play. Right? This is not something that exists in other cultures. Right? The French and the Spanish and pretty much all other cultures, they rejoice at cheating in sports. You do business in China, and the Chinese will cheat you every way possible. So amateur and collegiate sport was a key transmitter of Anglo values like fair play. So there was a prisoner in England in the 1950s who informed on a fellow inmate who was plotting an escape because this fellow inmate planned to use a gun in the attempt, and thus using a firearm was just not cricket. So that's an Anglo expression common in Australia and England. Something not cricket is just something that is unfair. So when we had the WASPs on top, we had a class code of conduct developed on the playing fields of Eton that had penetrated British society so deeply that even an inmate at Britain's maximum security prison in 1950 would respond to it. Now, America was always more freewheeling than England, but we had a similar code here. Not so much today, right? We no longer have clear sense of fair play, right? We no longer have a clear sense of letting everyone have his say in an open debate, right? That was a manifestation of this Anglo virtue. Today it's increasingly rejected. Cheating and gaming the system have always been present in America, but today they are much more accepted as a way of life, even at the highest levels of society. So we had 73 West Point students get caught cheating on exams. They're largely forgiven. They were not expelled for violating the school's honor code. Right, the election of Donald Trump would not have surprised the sociologists, because in the absence of an establishment, in the absence of an elite, we have an atomized population, right? An individualized population without a sense of cohesion, social trust. And it's quite easy for this individualized, atomized population to fall under the spell of a charismatic populist. So we don't have class authority that inevitably leads to the rule of charismatic men on horsebacks with their legions of personal followers. So in the current age, it's the centrality of personal charisma, right? Someone who gives you energy and enthusiasm. This charisma usually shows itself through the mastery of TV and social media, and this is our dominant political and social landscape. Donald Trump may be the first national figure in America in which his voters were followers of him rather than of a party or a platform. So we used to have an upper class that was an intermediary institution that could check or resist the power of corporations, the state, or any would-be Caesar. Right? Without this upper class, right, our freedoms are at risk because we don't have an elite group that is ready and willing to say no to the powers of government or of corporations. So we have a new environment, we have an atomized society, we have a wealthy and powerful elite that does not make up a coherent group. And so we have in daily life a decline in practical freedom in the United States. We don't have political norms, we don't have standards of personal behavior or morality, right? The lines are constantly shifting. We have ever more coercively enforced ideological and political lines from which no dissent and no freedom of conscience is allowed. We have an ever more intrusive communications and surveillance infrastructure from which even the President of the United States can be removed at the discretion of a private company such as Twitter, Facebook, and the like.
Because my dad taught there and a lot of other rich kids went there, that I viewed the...
All right, this is David Bahnsen, the sponsor of Mark Halperin's afternoon show. Here he's talking about work is the meaning of life.
Nike shoes that they apparently had infinite supply of as sort of this thing to aspire to. And so there was kind of almost class envy embedded in consumption and brands and experiences like you talk about. But then the other thing I'd say in my experience now living in Manhattan is consumption levels out. Like you do get to a point where everyone has that brand, everyone has that experience, everyone goes to that restaurant. What is more unique in people, what impresses people most today, I think, is when people, you sell a business and 3 days later you're working on your next one. There is this sort of aspirational society in American DNA that most certainly has led to more fulfilled people, but ultimately is less shallow and less. It leaves people more satisfied. I think that the consumptive view of life is insatiable. There's no possible way to ever have enough products and experiences where, from a production standpoint, there is the service of your fellow man that is, again, embedded in this creational truth. We are having our needs met by meeting the needs of others. Consumption is certainly not a sin. Consuming nicer things is not a sin. But trying to formulate happiness and joy and identity out of consumption is empty. And I do not believe that that is true on the productive side of this equation that I'm talking about.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of serial entrepreneurs, but one of the things that you note, and maybe being a wealth manager, you're attuned to this especially, is that all the messages that our society sends is that the aspirational ideal is not to work. The reason you're saving for retirement is so that you can stop working. As soon as you have enough money to stop working, you're out. And there's even this movement that got a lot of press a couple years ago called FIRE, Financial Independence, Retire Early. It's like, go work in your tech firm, save 70% of your money, and you can retire in your 30s or at 40 and not have to do anything the rest of your life. The idea of sort of a leisured existence as what you're trying to get to is deeply embedded into our culture, and maybe even goes back to something of the European aristocracy, which was, not a business aristocracy in some respects. I keep thinking about the Anglo-American ideal as some rich guy who inherited his money or has a title with this big estate out in the country, and he really doesn't do anything. Maybe he has servants, maybe he, occasionally meets with the prime minister or something, but this idea of like non-productive life is what you're working to achieve is the message we get bombarded with.
It definitely is. And so I try to make 2 points in the book. One is that was only something that has happened in our society because of two blessings that made it possible. We have the luxury of having this perverted view of the human existence because life expectancy expanded first by 1 decade after baby boomers were born before they became working age, and then by another 10 years after they became working age before they retired. So essentially going from an age 60 life expectancy to an age 78 life expectancy from 1946 to present day gave the mortality extension, gave it the possibility of thinking that way, whereas previously retirement plans were called death. And what you referred to is exactly right. I don't think it's necessarily true in the specifically American New World DNA, but in the old world, there was this sense of a kind of feudal, monarchistic, aristocratic vision where one had status by doing nothing and overseeing people who did things. The other piece is the prosperity, 3.13% real GDP growth post-war up until the time of the global financial crisis added a tens of trillions of dollars base to the global domestic product of the economy. And at that point, we then, of course, had financial conventions, IRAs, 401ks, pensions that were kind of products and services geared towards facilitating it. But you don't really develop the mentality for this if it isn't possible, and it became possible. It is obviously theoretically possible for someone to save the money and live long enough to not have to end their life on a 25-year vacation. That FIRE mentality that was geared towards even younger people is, to me, just the logical conclusion of what the baby boomers did. The millennials just running with the boomer mentality of their dad came home every night and said, I have the day circled on my calendar that I'm never going to work again once I'm eligible for the pension or whatever. And then a millennial has the ability to generate a certain amount of net worth earlier. Why shouldn't they adapt the same mentality if the message is that work is something you do so you won't have to do it anymore? As I became financially independent at a much younger age than I ever dreamed possible, it became very clear to me that there was something wrong with the way I think about this stuff relative to the rest of society, that not having that thing to wake up and do struck me as incomprehensible. And as I surrounded myself with more and more entrepreneurs and successful business people that felt the same as I did, I realized that these were mostly very well-adjusted people, very content, very happy, very purpose-driven. And yet the idea of, look, are there greater freedoms and amenities and margins available in that scenario? Of course. But the idea of saying, I now want to go golf every day, or I want to go drink every day, or I want to go be on a sailboat every day, or even the Christianized evangelical vision of this. I want to walk on the beach holding my wife's hand a lot, and then every 3 months spend a little more time.
So there are a lot of people who were able to overcome their drinking until they retired, right? There are a lot of vices that people are able to keep a handle on until they have an abundance of spare time. And then the vices kill them.
I'm volunteering with the deacons or an orphanage in Mexico or things that we're going to build, all of which are noble activities, all of which are good things. But in my view, none of which capture the essence of our lives.
Yeah. How do you think people should approach retirement?
Well, I first of all think we should just understand that the word needs to be used only in the context of some description of financial freedom, not a description of unproductive, inactivity. So when I think about retirement, I think about the point at which somebody doesn't need a paycheck to sustain themselves. But the notion of it meaning I don't have a paycheck, I want to be foreign for Christians. Or if I don't have a paycheck, I still have some other form of productive activity. And that, of course, is going to be different for each person. Now, some caveats are in order because I'm well aware of the sort of risk I take here as someone who's sitting in a corner office on 6th Avenue in Manhattan and takes a shower in the morning, not at night, and all those types of things. I don't think people work with their hands and hurt their back all day necessarily have that same luxury. And so there is going to be a difference in the way it plays out for working class people versus white collar. There's going to be a difference. I don't want people that chased bad guys on the street in their 30s to be cops on the street chasing bad guys when they're 74. There is age and stage wisdom here. I am asking at a macro level for a mentality shift that recognizes experience, expertise, and wisdom as valuable. And therefore, the burden is on companies to not adopt mandatory retirement ages. It's on senior people themselves to not be aspiring to get out of productive activity as early as possible. And of course, it's on younger people to respect older people and the wisdom that they may have. You stew all of this together, you mix all together, you get I think, much better recipe than we have now.
All right, this is David Bahnsen, who manages about $8 billion worth of funds. He's got a book out called Work is the Meaning of Life. It's Purim, time to celebrate Purim, Jewish holiday.